Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.
Good afternoon, Team Krulak community, and on behalf of Marine Corps University, the Marine Corps University Foundation, and the Brute Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare, welcome back to the Brutecast, our series designed to connect the worlds of the warfighter and PME with the best in innovative and creative thought. I'm your host, Major Ian Brown, Operations Officer at the Krulak Center. So today we're excited to build on a theme of this season of the Brutecast and welcoming senior Marine Corps leaders who are helping drive the Corps forward to meet the challenges of the 21st century. We welcome Lieutenant General David G. Bellon to the show, who currently serves as Commander, Marine Forces Reserve, and Commander, Marine Forces South. His wide-ranging career has taken him from the infantry to light armor and reconnaissance to the Judge Advocate General's Corps. He did multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and as a general officer has served as Deputy Commander for Mobilization for the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, Deputy Marine Forces Command, Director of Reserve Affairs, and Director of Strategy, Policy, and Plans, J5, U.S. Southern Command. And we're excited to share his perspectives with our audience today on how Marine Forces Reserve and Marine Forces South are supporting the changes underway with Force Design 2030, the challenges of the future operating environment in the 21st century, and more. So, sir, very much appreciate you taking the time out to come join our show and our community of interest here. And happy to let you want to open it up with any opening comments before we kind of get into some of the discussion points.
No, I would just say, I think probably the biggest change in my service, one of the biggest changes in my service is the way we're able to interact with stakeholders. We used to have a very traditional structure where you might, occasionally publish a campaign plan or maybe a white letter or messages. On our most intimate and best days, we were having school circles and small formations. And that was a very effective way to communicate, but very difficult to scale. And now, towards the end of my service, I love the fact that we're able to have these intimate professional conversations in a way that's scalable and gives access to people who are out there in those intimate leadership jobs and can contextualize what's happening to all the different stakeholders, primarily the force, but members of Congress, professional staffers, the parents, coaches, and teachers who give us our Marines. So I'm all about this, and I'm eager to participate with you all.
Great, thank you very much, sir. And yeah, the COVID was, a giant pain and giant headache and giant decrement for a lot of reasons, but it's proved to be a forcing function for certain things, exactly like this. This whole program kind of grew out of COVID as a forcing function for how we can engage our audience and senior leaders and share their ideas. And it's one of the few good things to come out of it is a sort of this leveling, this direct access. So very happy to keep this opportunity going here into the 5th season we've had. So kind of before we get into some of the main points we talked about beforehand, I think for the audience, if maybe you could give us kind of a laydown of what is Marine Forces Reserve doing right now? Where are they active? What are they supporting? What are the things that you would want to highlight for them today?
Well, I think for me, kind of going back to 2019, I assumed my current rank and billet as Commander of Marine Forces Reserve probably about a month after General Berger assumed the commandancy. And when he, in September of 2019, he published his initial planning guidance, the Commandant's planning guidance. And we were off and running on force design. The reality is, within a year, it became very clear to me that the service had culminated. It was completely consumed with the most wicked problem sets of force design. And primarily that was what capabilities that we needed to project forward, particularly in the Pacific, in order to deter China and avoid conflict. And if we came to conflict, how to win. And that consumed us as a service. We're a relatively small service. It was a very difficult problem set. Organizationally, technologically, tactically, our doctrine had to evolve. Priorities within the service had to evolve. And so initially, a traditional approach would have been for me to wait for requirements from the process to kind of fall down to me as a subordinate commander, as a MAR-4 commander, in order to design the future force and capabilities. That's the way we've always done it. But it was obvious that that wasn't going to happen. And in fact, to this day, I still have not received a single formal requirement from the service for the future of the reserves. So it became a very much a kind of what I would call, in contact, movement contact philosophy, where we were designing the future of the service by paying attention and collaborating in the actual force design piece for the service writ large. And from that, we have offered the service a menu of options, kind of real time, based on emerging doctrine, emerging capabilities, technology, and what we're saying from talent management perspective. This is where we believe the future of the reserve force can contribute in absolutely new paradigms, and it is new, completely new paradigms. Things like the blended retirement system. I mean, wrap your head around this. I'm into my fourth decade now as a Marine, and for the vast majority of my service, if once you got a Marine to year 11, you had him or her, and those middle years you were an indentured servant, and that's essentially why the middle years were so hard. You're going to the Pentagon, you're going to get an oar, and you're going to row. But now, when blended retirement fully hits, a Marine is just as likely to leave service at year 13 as they are at year 4. So we better offer better options and more constructive and a wider range of options for them to answer their call to service and stay in MARPATs as long as we can have them and be less concerned about what component they're in, reserve or active. We're in the business of winning battles. We win battles with Marines. We get access to Marines. And that has been a major evolution with my peers and the Commandant, and we've kind of awoken to that. So in a lot of ways, we're on absolutely new ground. Absolutely new ground.
Great, thanks, sir. So kind of with the menu of options you talked about that you were kind of developing, what are some of the things specifically that since the CPG came out and you took over command that what's on that menu that you've created to offer to the service?
Well, I would say, again, I'll take you back to that 2019, 2020. I kept trying to tease out or coax out requirements for the reserve component. I talked to my peers who are MEF commanders and MAR4 commanders and said, hey, look, as you're trying to answer these questions about force design, what this means to 1 MEF or 2 MEF or 3 MEF or MAR4 Indo-PACOM, what are your gaps? What are the requirements that are unfulfilled? And you can levy on me. And even if I can't eat 100% of that, I might be able to reduce your risk by 37% or 43%. Not, something that is significant, maybe not the answer, but part of the answer. And again, all those subordinate commands were consumed. And so after my first year of kind of running into the wall, so to speak, intellectually, we had to take a different approach. And after rereading, force design and all the planning guidance and listening carefully to the IPTs and all the planning groups, the other group that was kind of lumped with me with MFR that still didn't really have a role in the movie yet, so to speak, was 2MEF. And so as I began to kind of just think, okay, what does 2MEF and MFR have in common? And what really jumped off at me is that, we are the service retained force of the Marine Corps, us together. And what is that? Well, every service holds back a certain slice of its combat throw. So it's not aligned or associated or allocated forces to the geographic or functional COCOMs. The services hold that back. The Army, for example, is the 18th Airborne Corps. The Marine Corps, most professionals, by the time you reach major, that's 2MEF. But actually, it's 2MEF and MFR. And if one of the mandates from the Commandant is we're not going to give up our role as the nation's 911 force, but the new reality is that 1MEF and 3MEF are going to be largely lashed to the Pacific, largely. So my whole career, 1MEF was kind of the giant hammer that swung around the globe whenever there was a contingency, a large contingency, CENTCOM in particular. But what we realized was that those days are over. And so we had to come up with a model that allowed us to do contingency and crisis response everywhere else on the planet besides Indo-PACOM. And so that has been the Commandant's task to me and to the 2MEF commander, is to design this force that is capable of contingency and crisis response outside of Indo-PACOM and be the nation's 911 force. And that's basically required, stripping it all the way down to the bare metal and starting over and looking at capabilities and capacities and all the things we would need to do that in the next couple decades.
All right, thanks, sir. And that actually, this ties pretty well to a previous broadcast we did. We had Major General Donovan on with 2nd Marine Division, under 2MEF, and they had been tasked to do some experimentation, practical experimentation. And we had a great conversation with him. Was there anything either with 2nd Marine Division under Task Force 61-2 or, more broadly with 2MEF in that non-Indo-PACOM, that experimentation focus that you've done that you can talk about?
Yeah, we've done quite a bit of deliberate planning. Staffs have combined to shape and understand the requirements. The service is looking very hard at a construct where we're on the earth and surf, the menu in the joint world. In the joint world, there's a menu. The immediate response force, crisis response, contingency response force that's listed out. In the joint world, the joint staff knows who's on the dot at any given time. It's like having duty, right? Who's available? Who is the throw? And the commandant directed us to look at building a package that would be capable of sitting on that. And depending, where you are temporally in that answer, if you're in the immediate response force, you got to go immediately. You're locked down. You're basically, essentially, figuratively sitting on packs, for example. Contingency response force in the broader force, where you may be later in time or have a larger time window, you may be assigned to a supporting mission globally and you collapse on the problem set. But either way, you're dedicating forces to that construct. And if we did that, then how do we continue to meet the MU responsibility? How are we positioned on the globe inside the weapons engagement zones of our likely adversaries beyond Indo-PACOM in order to be that stand-in force that force design talks about? How do we do that within the capacity and the capabilities that exist in 2MEF? Where is it short, and how do we mitigate that by uniquely designing a reserve force that can stand into that rotation?
All right, thanks, sir. So, kind of continuing the in the force design theme here, one of the things we've also talked about on past episodes is the talent management piece of that. The human capital, which has become sort of the big focus this year for the commandant. And in talking actually with your aide and setting this up, one of the things that Marfores has under that I was not familiar with, and I think it'd be good to discuss, is the Diversity Aimed Officer Program, or DAOP. I'm not sure how you put that acronym out there, but something that's very unique that I'm certainly not familiar with. So could you describe that, kind of where it came from and what it aims to do?
Yeah, that's just basically what I would call a grassroots effort for us. Since I'm going into my 10th year as a general here coming up this coming year, and as long as I've been aware, we've been very aware and consumed with the idea that at the top of the Marine Corps, we all look too much like me. There's not a lot of diversity at the very top of the General Officer Corps in the Marine Corps, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But at the end of the day, one of the things when you go to TBS or you go to our initial training pipeline, what we realize is that there are underrepresented segments of our society that join the Marine Corps, and when you get to the basic school where all of our lieutenants are, we're actually pretty representative of the force and of society. But too many of the lieutenants from these underrepresented segments of society perceive barriers, real or otherwise, to them making very long runs in the Marine Corps. They begin to plan their exit strategy because barriers that I certainly have not perceived any time in my career, because I'm a white European Caucasian male, only thing I perceived is, my God, that pull-up bar is going to crush me if I don't do my work, or I better do my PT, or I better do my PME, or I'm not going to be able to compete. But there was nothing beyond that would have prevented me from continuing on and achieving whatever goals I set. So one of the ways they hedge is by selecting MOSs that don't typically lead to senior generals. There aren't any, I don't think in 3 and 4 stars, there's only 15 3 stars by law in the Marine Corps, and only 2 4 stars. And I don't think any of them, for example, are admin officers, administrative MOSs. There are a few communications officers. I don't think there are any in the 3 and 4 star. And there's only a couple of logisticians, for example. I mean, it is disproportionately weighted, whether it's right or wrong. And it always has been with ground combat arms and aviation. So by the time people progress through their career path, they've almost designed their exit, so to speak. And as the pyramid gets more and more narrow, you end up with this kind of narrow demographic at the top. So our idea was, okay, in my command, I have access to 100,000 humans. You know, that's my size of the command. 100,000 Marines, people that are already Marines. And there's some exceptional Marines. You know, it takes 1,000 corporals. Think about this: 1,000 corporals to make one meritorious sergeant. And in the IRR, which is about 60,000 Marines, that's largely the vast majority of which are kind of on the back end of a 4x2 contract that did 4 years of active duty, and every officer and enlisted Marine ends up in the individual ready reserve, kind of waiting for their time to run out. And in the IRR, there are more meritorious sergeants. These are Marines that were coming off active duty than every active duty wing and division combined. So people really realize that, hey, we hemorrhage 33,000 Marines a year. That's a very quantitative analysis. But when you look at the data that talks about the qualitative analysis of who we're hemorrhaging, you know, the lazy Marine would say, oh, it's the bottom quarter, bottom half. They're non-hackers, they all get out. Not the case. And the same is true for the officer corps. So for us, it was getting into that population and trying to write the movie about what it would take, exposing them, kind of demystifying them to the profession of the Marine Corps and what it would take to make a 35-year run so that you're competitive for commandant. And what does that look like? You know, from the very beginning of, you know, the 00 course at TBS to command and staff to top level school to what the career progressions are like, and image their way through what it's like, and then not just paint a need for them to make it, but to make it very clear over a week-long period that we want them to succeed. That whatever perceived or real barriers there were in the past, you know, we're standing in front of them saying, no. You've been screened for this day out, this diversity aimed officer program. We had, I think, 150 applicants, took 40 to Quantico this year, and put in front of them, you know, great senior mentors from across the Marine Corps that tell the story of their life, to demystify this, to kind of get in their mind, well, I guess I could take a run at this, and I'm not going to self-eliminate early by planning my exit. I'm just going to roll the dice like everybody else, and hopefully that generates a pool going forward over the coming generations. Look, it's not going to solve the Marine Corps' problem, but we weren't going to sit around and admire the problem either while we had access to 100,000 people. And so that's what that is.
Great, thanks, sir. And I guess to kind of follow up on that before I get to some of the questions here in the chat, has this been running long enough for you to be able to get some sort of feedback and response about the impact on that population, or is it still too early to tell?
Well, we just finished our second iteration, and I will tell you that across the board from the Marines, you know, it ends with this year. It ended, you know, it's almost like we kind of looked at like Nick Saban for all those Alabama haters out there to deal with it. You know, we wanted them to feel like a 5-star recruit. We wanted them to feel like we were going to give them our best, not emotional, but professional demonstration. And it culminates at the end of that week after they've seen everything else. Like this year, they're in their dress blues and they're in the ACMAC's quarters at 8th and I before the evening parade. And the ACMAC himself is spending time with them. And so everything from the ACMAC on down, the people who were involved, all of the instructors, mentors, and cadre, along with the applicants, would say across the board, much better this year. We had about 4 times the interest from the Marines from year 1 to year 2. And I can already tell by what's happening in year 3, it's going to be very competitive. You know, I would say maybe half of the Marines from last year would have qualified to get an OCS into an officer program, if I'm being really brutally honest. This year, I'd say 97%. I speak to every single TBS company. The Commandant Censar, Major, and I were released to speak to every single company. And the questions I got from this year's from this year's attendees, was just, I mean, if I would have closed my eyes, I wouldn't have known the difference if I was speaking to Fox Company at TBS or this group of young enlisted Marines who had professional aspirations. So the quality is higher and higher. So I think it's a good harbinger. It's a vignette still. Hard to draw any, professional conclusions from it, but I am encouraged.
Yeah, thanks for elaborating on that, sir. And it does sound at least like it's trending in a good direction.
You know what it is, Ian, more than anything else? It's a demonstration of what talent management really is. Talent management is not going to be driven by this top-down programmatics from the service. It's going to be a cultural shift among those of us who have direct access to Marines, and our attitude, our literally the way we see Marines, not as inventory and consumables, but as people of immense potential that we are trying to take on a very long journey. That's how you age the force. This idea of aging the force. Well, you got to retain them first, before you age anybody. And so then, you got to excite them. You got to get into the movie of their life and ride that out.
Yeah, that bottom up versus up down. And for the audience here and those listening later, I'm going to put in the Talent Management Strategy Group's contact information, because that's kind of what they've been trying to do is, not just sort of throw darts at ideas they think they have, but gather input from bottom up to see what type of talent management things like this could be effective for different populations.
And that group, TMX, they're deeply involved this year. They see this as an emerging. Here I'm writing my own name. They see this as an emerging best practice, as what talent. I'm kind of parroting what they told me. This is what we think talent management actually looks like. You're not going to wait for a big program. It's a paradigm shift and a culture shift within the force in order to better value and communicate a future with the people we have access to already.
Yeah, I might have to bring him back on so we can kind of revisit this here in the coming months and see how the next.
Fact check me. Yeah,
Yeah. not fact check. Just see how things are going. Okay, I want to start getting into some of the questions in the chat here, and we'll start off with actually from our director here at the Krulak Center, Ms. Valerie Jackson, who I'm sure you know in her other reserve capacity. So she's asking about how Marine Force Reserve has just stood up the Marine Innovation Unit, or MIU, and it's something we've heard sort of talked about on this end as we're a center for innovation too. But can you talk more about the genesis of this unit and its mission, what it's trying to accomplish, and how it's going to uniquely leverage the reserve skill sets?
Well, I mean, think of it this way. Again, this is really a talent management play. When you have somebody that, let's say, gets out of the Marine Corps as a captain, and she goes on, she ends up, going to Vanderbilt, get her MBA, and she ends up at, name the professional consulting group on Wall Street. She has a very unique skill set and an approach that you simply cannot make on active duty. Can't do it. I mean, I'm a reservist, so I got off active duty as a captain, and I've had professional careers. First as an attorney, ended up as a managing partner of a law firm, and then later on got out and got into the renewable sector, and that just brings with it a completely different construct of executive skill set that's really hard to develop in a single pipeline. So we knew we had this, everything from PhDs in applied mathematics who were on faculty at MIT, who happened to be logisticians, to you name it, C++ coders, on and on and on and on and on. And the idea, what happens, Ian, is if we need a unique person, like, hey, I need one of the best C++ coders on the planet, I would get a phone call from a meth commander, who may be a friend of mine, and say, hey, Dave, I really need a C++ coder. Can you find me one? And we ran it like a fantasy football draft. We put the word out, and like any Marine, you're going to sit there. If you're one of the best in the world at this, but you're also, an officer at Anglico, you're an officer at Anglico because you want to have two different lives. And when the word comes out for what you do in your civilian career, it's like saying, hey, I'm taking volunteers for the working party. You want to volunteer? A shrewd Marine's going to exercise a little tactical patience and say, well, tell me about what the working party is. And so it was a completely unforecastable resource we had. There were all these vignettes about what this particular unique talent sets were out there in the reserves. But as we get deeper into the information age, we need more of it. The requests become more and more. So instead of running it like a fantasy football draft, we kind of started with a what if. What if we dedicate actual structure, SMCR, Select Marine Corps Reserve structure? Think there's multiple different flavors in the reserve component. There's the IRR, which I already talked about, which are all those Marines waiting to time out. They're basically, in the on-deck circle, like think Korea. We basically went to war with Korea by pulling World War II vets out of the IRR. That's how we went to war. There is the SMCR. Think traditional groups, squadrons, debts, battalions, batteries, companies, units of employment. And then there's something called the individual Marine augments, which are IMA debts. Anyway, we thought if we actually dedicate real structure out of the SMCR, take what might have been, say, a company, and use that structure to gather the most unique sets of credentialed professionals off of Wall Street, Silicon Valley, across the United States, and bundled them there with agnostic of rank and MOS, totally agnostic. We have enlisted sergeants, we have colonels in this thing, but they're all at the very, very, very high end of their profession. And what the idea was, the value proposition was, if we gather them together and focus them on accelerating the acquisition of unique capabilities that are critical to force design and unique to the information age. And in so doing, so the typical procurement process and research, it takes years. It's, and you get well into Moore's law very quickly. By the time you realize the capability in the fleet, it's antiquated already. And that problem is compounding. So it's all about time, accelerating the acquisition of these unique capabilities, and then using other people's money to pay for it. As we looked at the Marine Corps, we do a lot of things really well, and some things we do really poorly is to get our share of, say, the innovation dollars. There's billions in play with the DoD, but compared to the Air Force and the Navy and the Army, we're terrible at it. And so to get out there, find avenues to accelerate the acquisition of capabilities that will help us win battles and spend other people's money doing it. And so that was the value proposition. That's what we've done. And it's been wildly successful. In fact, we're about to brief our own report card here at the General Officer Symposium next week.
Well, great. And I'm sure Ms. Jackson will have some good stuff to bring back to us for possible future action on our part with that as well, sir. Okay. Next question. So there's a couple questions here. I'm going to try and see if I can kind of combine them. And if I fail, I'll just re-ask the second part here. But it's kind of a 2.5-part question. So first part of it is asking, now, since reservists can spend 5 years on ADOS, then that's active orders for those in the audience, due to an MOS change here. One, is there an appetite to augment active duty B billets like MSG combat instructor with reserve personnel as a possible way of easing some of the mandatory requirements on the active force? And then second part is there a look or desire on MARFOR's leadership to designate some of those E8, E9 senior personnel as OC field sponsors on the reserve side, working with their active component to help manage some of this force? And then the last part of that is increasing permeability between those different active and reserve components, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, again, I grew up, and so have you so far, in a Marine Corps where there was a one-way door. You did your active duty time, and if you wanted to get out and go into the reserves, essentially that door only swung one way. But with blended retirement, when this thing hits, at the end of the day, it's just been, I'm sure some of your audience has seen this too. When you get out into a real operating environment, Iraq, Afghanistan were the two primary ones in the last 20 years where I was back and forth. The greatest compliment a Marine reservist can get when you're sitting in a place like Ali Salem and you're coming home after a year-long deployment, and some Marine that you spent the year with says, "Wait, you're a reservist? I had no idea." I mean, that's like better than any end of tour award, you name it. Because in those environments, nobody cares, nor should they. And certainly the enemy doesn't care. So, it is the whole construct, the lens through which we view reservists or active duty is full of all sorts of biases and ignorance. Because at the end of the day, your human capacity and your professionalism should have nothing to do with your designation of which component you're a member of. I've seen plenty of great active duty Marines who respond in their moment when the moment gets real and they're done, rehearsing and practicing and it's real. They ascend into great. But I've also seen plenty who have failed miserably, couldn't handle it because it was just out of things were too many variables were out of their control and they culminated. They're flawed. Same thing applies to reservists. So I think when it comes to how we're going to view this, because of the blended retirement system, that door is going to have to swing both ways. I know that just looking at the MIU, for example, I know for a fact that like Marine Corps Warfighting Lab and the CD&I would love to have some of that talent come back on active duty and work for them full time. So I think what you're going to find is if you're at the top of your peer group, there's going to be a much more permeable career path going forward. And that's going to happen soon. This is a reality that's going to happen very soon. We're already looking at the policies and authorities that would allow us to do that. The second piece about management, for those of you, I don't know if you realize this, there's a third very small flavor of reservists, and that is active reserve. These are reservists who are on full-time orders. There's about 2,500 of them or so, 2,700. And their whole role in life, they're embedded with the MEFs, with the MAR4s. Their whole role in life is to facilitate access and integration of reserve Marines into active formations and into the supporting establishment. They are uniquely trained and qualified. They understand the unique policies, the manpower, the budgets, the buckets of money that we get access to through Congress. That's the value add. But the Marine Corps is so undisciplined. When they get out there, they see, oh, you're a really good major. I don't really understand that whole AR thing, but we're going to make you the requirements officer. We're going to put you in the G9. And it's free chicken to some chief of staff someplace. And then my peer will call me and say, Dave, how do I do this and how do I do that? I'm thinking, you got people on your staff that are bought and paid for that are supposed to be inside your conference room, not just answering your questions, but driving solutions by looking forward and anticipating requirements. And we just have to get better than that. So before I get into experimenting with ideas about E8s and E9s and all that stuff, we should just do better with the resources we have. That just requires a little bit of, on the outside, people get fired for stuff we do every day on the inside. We have to be better. This is an overhead thing. We have it. We bought and paid for these professionals. Let's put them to work.
Great. Thanks, sir. And I would note that from Ms. Jackson again, she put in there an email address about some specific MFR admin questions where those can go to the G1 out there. And I'll make sure to include those in the show notes here as well. So if there's a sort of more, MOS specific question here, we can.
Yeah, for those of you that are listening that don't know, Miss Jackson is also Brigadier General Jackson. I don't think she's the newest anymore. But she got promoted this year. An amazing officer who's got a long runway in front of her, but she's also demonstrating her micromanagement at this point with Ian. So well done, Val.
I'm sure I'll get briefed on that afterwards.
Yeah, you will. That'll be helpful. I just helped you out, Ian.
Yeah. All right. Keeping going through the questions on the chat here. Next one is asking about how we're going to see any reserve force change to keep in line with the idea of the crisis response force, whether there be any significant changes to MOSs or force structure, and this kind of ties back to the work you do with 2MEF.
Yeah. So again, if you kind of go back to my first answer is we're not getting requirements from the Marine Corps, and that's okay. This is an in-contact drill, so we're kind of aligning to the middle, so to speak, metaphorically. And so one of the things that we're looking at right now, I get the Congress has unique interests and sensitivities in the Guard and reserves, in part because their constituents that live in their states, of course, but also because a disproportionate percentage of the vets in Congress now were in the Guard or reserve, the veterans. So I'm one of the officers that has to testify every year in front of the SACD and the HACD, and they give me resources beyond the Marine Corps' budget. And so the art of this, Ian, is understanding what I can offer to enable and accelerate force design that may not be well understood by conventional Marine Corps. And so here's an example. I get something called NAGREA, National Guard and Reserve Equipment Allocation Fund. And this year, make a long story short, I got almost $11 million checkbook in my pocket. And it was supposed to go to some F5 upgrades. We run the aggressor squadrons for the Marine Corps out of the reserves. Can't be executed this year, so I'm going back to Congress to ask for a change in money. As part of this, went to McWill and said, here's the deal. I'm going to buy $11 million worth of littoral craft. I'm like high-end littoral craft, not Zodiacs, but boats that can move around in the littorals. in order to do maneuver, recon, counter recon, and potentially carry a strike missile and strike. And if I apply the resources to buy it and the structure, the actual structure to run the exercises, you give me the tasks to help the Marine Corps' understanding of this emerging capability. And the end state will help to refine and define the actual requirements for a littoral maneuver that the Marine Corps will have as part of this EABO and stand-in force concept. And so, that is not a conventional use of the reserves. Hey, I need to mobilize a HIMARS battery. It's different, and it's changing. And it's by paying close attention and having ongoing, constant communication within the Marine Corps, both the operating forces, primarily TUMEF, and also CD&I, where doctrine and innovation is happening for the service.
All right, thanks, sir. And that's actually, I think, a good segue into another kind of point we talked about with your staff before, which is the MFR campaign plan. And I was, reading through it right before we started here. And is this something, I've seen campaign plans from other parts of the service before. Is this something that was sort of a specific outgrowth of, as you described it, Common Ops Planning Guidance comes out, Force Design consumed it, and you were without the requirements, you went through and looked at what you could do and put back in?
Yeah, I mean, look at it this way. I know that what we're doing is very unconventional. And some people are really comfortable with that. But boy, other people, they spent their professional life understanding this pretty tried and true model and processes and procedures. When you start changing things, it becomes threatening. And, the iron or frozen middle rises up and the antibodies rise up to slow you down so that rice bowls can be protected, and they make sure their understanding and their influence is preserved. So as a tool of alignment, it was really all about the why, trying to give people the why. Here's what we're going to do, but more importantly, here's why we're doing it right now. And then one of the first sentences, I make it very clear, hey, we're at a point of historic inflection for the service. And this is nothing that I've experienced in my time or the Commandant has experienced in his time. We have a near peer or now peer adversary that has actually surpassed us in some ways. So things that we've always taken for granted, air superiority, information dominance, all those things are really in question. So we had better develop some answers quickly, or we're going to be on the bad end of history here. And that's going to require a pace and an approach that is not comfortable. And so the campaign plan was to try to get after the why in order to cultivate alignment and make sure everyone understands it's okay. This is a movement to contact intellectually, and we're going to be uncomfortable. That's okay. It's better to row and be a part of it than to sit back and snipe from the sidelines.
Right. Thank you, sir. So I want to shift gears a little bit here because we've been talking about Marine Forces Reserve for most of this conversation, but mentioned in the introduction, you're also Commander of Marine Forces South. Mm-hmm. So with that hat, what are some of the concerns, the challenges that you're looking at as Commander of Marine Forces South? What are some of the places or some of the activities that the Marines under that command are doing that are worth noting?
Well, let me offer it through the lens of different stakeholders here. Okay. Interestingly, you grew up in the Marine Corps, you have primarily an east-west perspective. You're looking either now, of course, you're looking largely at the Pacific and that problem set. Before you were looking east, either at CENTCOM or EUCOM, occasionally AFRICOM. But we're not trained to look north or south. We don't look at Antarctica or the poles, and we certainly don't consider Latin America or Southcom an area that is in our current problem set or interest priorities. Unfortunately, our adversaries disagree with us. And so China, Russia, Iran are all very active in our hemisphere. And with the key strategic end state of putting us at risk in our hemisphere in order to prevent us from projecting power abroad. So let's just use China, for example. It doesn't take a genius to look at the numbers of ships that China is building. That's not a regional force. That's a global force. And what do you need as a global navy? You need advanced naval bases overseas. That's kind of what we have in the Pacific. And if you turn the map around and look at it through China's lens, they have seen us hem them up. They're Mahanian also. They understand that they see themselves as a sea power. They believe that our forward naval presence has prevented them from 70 years of breaking out and ascending to their natural place on the globe. And they particularly look at the South China Sea and our activities there, not just our physical presence, but our ability to see into China as a direct threat to their sovereignty and their natural ascension. Okay, that's what they believe. So if you've lived in that for 70 years, would you not want to do the same thing to us when the power balance changes? So when you look at the Belt and Road Initiative and what they've invested in our hemisphere, the fact that they largely control the Panama Canal now, which beyond any question is the most vital sea line of communication to our nation anywhere on the planet in our hemisphere, Chinese control. And again, like I said, setting the conditions for advanced naval bases in our hemisphere. Now, for those of you who know what a Renhai is or a Luhang destroyer, imagine a squadron of those stationed in our hemisphere, and you have to go back to the War of 1812 when you sailing south of Mayport or Galveston and you're in contested waters. Been a couple hundred years since we've lived in that reality. And so, those are things that China has learned and how they've lived for 70 years. And, I tell the story all the time. I was in top level school after battalion command in Iraq. I got sent to the Naval War College. And I'm there with guys in my class for Bill Journey, Roger Turner, Chip Bierman, we're all lieutenant colonels coming just out of Iraq, our third tour or whatever. And we're there, and the professors in 2008 are telling us about the second island chain and intercontinental ballistic ship killing missiles and persistent ISR aspirations of the Chinese. It's 2008. And most of us got orders to Afghanistan while in school. So all we wanted to know about was Pashtun Wali. And then in 2018, the National Defense Strategy comes out and tells the Marine Corps, you will now have China as a pacing threat. And we did what we always do. We looked at the intelligence, we looked at what China was doing and what their projected capabilities were, and we took a collective breath and did the, holy cow, this is worse than we thought, and force design came from it. So my question would be, what if we were paying attention in 2008? Could we have mitigated the strategic situation we were in now? Probably. And so what I'm saying is to my peers is it's 2008 in our hemisphere and we better pay attention. Doesn't need we need news or anything else down there, but we must compete hard. What does that competition look like? It looks like presence, but we're in the information age. And so I would say information operations are dominant and there's enough physical presence to validate and and to support our primary effort, which is in the information domain. And that's a very wide spectrum, counter space, all those things we have to be active in down there. But we have to be present down there because our peers and our friends and allies, not our peers, but our friends and allies down there, the Chinese are courting them very hard, and we better run in that race, or we're going to have a problem. We're going to realize it too late. So we're doing things like right now we have, I think, about 600 submarines deployed for UNITAS. The Mesa Verde is down there. There are 29 nations participating in that. It's a pretty large naval exercise off of the coast of Brazil. We do a number of exercises down there. We collaborate pretty closely with South and MARSOC on some activities, but it is a different presence than we would have had in CENTCOM or in INDOPACOM because the mission set is different. From a talent management perspective, it's critical to the reserves. So for me, I was part of the reserves in the 90s after my active duty time. And we were not a very professional force, particularly at the leadership pieces, 05, lieutenant colonel and above. And what 9/11 did for us, a lot of my generation had multiple combat tours at different levels of our professional careers. And so we became legitimate, or you could argue, I would assert that we became legitimate MAGTF officers, but we needed a sustained mission set to do that. You're not going to do it on notional training or virtual training or PowerPoint. You got to be out there facing the time space problem sets and the human being business that comes with being a deployed Marine leader. And so what Southcom offers is a chance for us from a talent management perspective to first retain top talent because they're doing really interesting things. We're embarked in commanding something pretty close to a MU, at least an embarked MAGTAF on the Mesa Verde. That's a reserve colonel right now doing that. That's interesting to them. And in return, that gives us a platform to first identify talent. We're retaining them by giving them good work, and that combination allows us to develop them. So that's what that's all about.
Great. Thank you very much, sir. I got one more question here in the chat that kind of goes back to the Marfor Res side. And then if there's nothing else that pops up in the next couple minutes, we're getting close to an hour. So happy to call it a day once we get through this one. The question is, with many Marines that spend their time kind of as you described, going on active duty, and before they decide to make the transition over to the Marine Corps Reserves, and then going over to the reserves, they find that depending on their MOS, there may not be the same support structure that you have in the active forces, and that's things like whether it's contracting, dispersing, comptrollers, kind of the things we may take for granted as available to us, not as easy to find or access. So, what's being done or looked at to plug in where those some of those holes might be, and make sure that there's no impact on promotion and advancement for those Marines?
Yeah. So I'm not trying to turf off this question at all, but you take on a different lens when you get out. When you decide to get out, you're getting out for your own personal reasons. Most of us don't hate the Marine Corps when we get out, but you have other goals and ambitions that you want to undertake, whether for your family or your own civilian career or whatever it is, right? And then you continue to drill because you discover within you this kind of irrational call to service. All of the bureaucracies and the things that annoy you as being part of the Marine Corps, none of that stuff goes away in the reserves. I mean, some of the time wasting that is inherent in any large bureaucracy when you need to stay on, which you'll find is, the difference is, think of it this way. Labor Day weekend just happened, right? And if you had you went to 2-7, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, and you said, okay, hey, go up in the barracks and tell all the Marines on Tuesday morning after the 96, we're going to the field. It's probably going to rain, and it's going to be hard. We're going to hump 10 miles to get out there. But here's the deal. If you don't want to train today, you don't really have to come down. There's not much I can do about it. So everybody who wants to come train, come on. Okay, so if you have a leadership billet in the reserves, your entire force is basically making that decision every drill weekend. If Lance Corporal Bellon doesn't want to show up anymore, there's not much I can actually do about it, even if I'm under contract. And 25% of the force is not obligated at all, meaning every month they decide whether to continue or not. And who are they? Every sergeant and above, basically. So when you start on that initial formation, everyone comes from this crazy life. If you're in your 30s, probably your family situation's getting more complicated. You got your job on Wall Street or whatever it is that you do. You're involved in the community. They want some of you. You're coaching your kids' team. It's just nuts. And then you get there on Friday and you deal with all this ridiculousness that always happens, But at the end of the day, you've made a decision and you're with people that have made that decision. And when you start with that every time, that becomes pretty addicting. I mean, I stayed in because I love being around Marines. And all of the inefficiencies and friction that you described, I wish I could tell people that goes away. It doesn't. But somehow in your life, you rack and stack what's important. And your peers, your professional peers, are doing the same thing. And it just seems to be more endurable that way. Because time is precious. You're just not going to obsess over the stuff that frustrates you. You're going to get on with coaching, teaching, and mentoring in the mission.
Great. Thank you, sir. All right. We got one more question in the chat, and then I'm going to call a wrap up here so we can honor everybody's time. And this switches back to the Marfor South piece, sir. So you described, talking about Unitas going down and doing some of those exercises for that presence piece. Has there been, are you looking at any sort of more persistent presence in terms of something like a UDP type deployment? For those in the audience, that's a unit deployment program where, kind of like going to Okinawa, you just go there for 6 months and you're present there for 6 months. Is that looked at in the Southcom theater at all?
No, I don't think so, because that is not what's needed. I mean, the UDP program is about putting, combat capacity forward, battalions and squadrons, let's say, forward in order to go to combat if needed. Where what's needed in Southcom right now, more than anything, is competition. So what you might expect is say, hey, we need a couple of majors to go to command and staff in Brazil or Chile or Argentina or whatever. And we need you to get in there and meet your peer group and stay close to them for the next 15 years and align our values and offer a unique relationship that is different than China, that is different than our other adversaries. And, make sure that as these professionals grow and they run their services and they're dealing with their elected officials, that, we demonstrate who we are on our best days, that we are military professionals who willingly submit to civilian authority and our allegiance is to the Constitution. Those basic principles that, that you can sit around in public and have a conversation regarding politics or God and not worry about some commissar coming over your shoulder and making sure that you're aligned with, those are that is the direct contrast. That's what competition looks like in Southcom. And then the other piece is to be well aware of what these countries are thinking. Right now, Colombia is in play. And especially when you look at its proximity to the Panama Canal on both the Pacific Ocean and access to the Atlantic. So just being aware of all those things and being present. It's not a UDP paradigm. It's dedicated individuals and small teams.
Thank you very much, sir. And this will be the last question.
Okay.
I noted in there, somebody just got it in right at the deadline. So, and this might be actually kind of a good thing to look at because this does look down to the future. And the question is asking about challenges in terms of Marine Corps recruiting. And, we've all seen that not just the Marine Corps, but all the services are facing a recruiting challenge for a number of reasons. So what is has Marine Corps Recruiting Command come looking to MFR at all for assistance? And what are your thoughts about how the reserves can help and contribute to the recruiting mission?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. We have a regular relationship with MCRC, Marine Corps Recruiting Command. Regular. We're out there. We are the Marine Corps' presence in Iowa. And where our Marines are Texas. We have a lot of presence in the middle of the country where the Marine Corps is not, so to speak. So we're always working together with MCRC. I think probably in a bigger way, Ian, we're trying to make it clear the Marine Corps suffers more than any other service as far as our overall retention of the force. There's a survey that every single service member takes when you leave active duty. It's called the Jammers survey. And in there, the Marine Corps, compared to every other service, scores off the charts on pride of service. You can imagine we all beat our chests, hoorah. But then we start getting into kind of some of our flaws, character flaws. The only legitimate way to serve as a Marine is on active duty by far. That's we believe that. Highest continued call to service. Okay, that makes sense. That's a good one. It's in a good column. And by far the highest propensity to cross deck. So the National Guard, for example, puts way more money into recruiting our active duty Marines than the Marine Corps does. And as a result, we have the lowest percentage by far of retaining our Marines in the Marine Corps into the reserve component. And so we've been able to get away with that because we've been largely a first-term force that turns over 33,000 Marines every year. That's more than MFR, SMCR, IMADETs, and AR populations combined. Every year we just in the street, send them out. And so if we're really going to age the force in this blended retirement era, we got to be serious about providing options for our Marines to have this more permeable service where they're just as credible and lethal as we need them to be on the battlefield, but also bring these skills and insights that they might gain from a dual career back in. Can't do it for everybody. It's not the militia, but you've got to be able to open that up to a slice of the force. And that's the kind of stuff that we're talking to MCRC about. It's like, hey, we'll help you with the initial accessions pipeline, but we got to do better at keeping the Marines that we actually make Marines.
Right. Thank you very much, sir. And on that, we're coming up to about an hour here. So I got no other questions for you, sir. Do you have any final comments or thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with?
Yeah. Don't take anything I said about the bureaucracy and the waste of time. I'm just treating everybody like an adult here. I wish I could say, well, yeah, we found the solution for that. It's on PowerPoint slide number 17. If you look in the notes section, it's not going to happen. The same things that frustrate you are the same things that frustrated the Centurions. It's just part of the business. But what I am saying is that I want you, if you're active duty now, and even if you stay active duty, I'm just asking you to open your mind a little bit about what total force really means and how informed are you about the total force. For example, if that sergeant is getting out and she is breaking your heart because you made her a meritorious sergeant and you were convinced that your inspired leadership was going to keep her, but she decides she wants to get out, do you know how much insurance costs on the outside? For example, the average insurance cost for her, especially if she's got a family, is $1,800 a month. 18. If she affiliates with the reserves, TRICARE Select, $299 a month. Think about it. If you don't know that as a professional, how are you counseling your Marines? And the same thing goes for the value of retirement and the career opportunities for your best Marines who elect to get out. If not, all you're doing is handing them off to the National Guard. And we got to do better than that. We win battles with Marines. You got to keep Marines. And that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And that really, going back to some of these the past guests we've had on here in the last few weeks, that really is that echoes the same theme. Is we build them, we got to keep them, and do a better job of understanding why they stay and why they go. So, all right, to our audience, thank you very much for joining us today, Lieutenant General David Bellon. Sir, very much appreciate your time, spending time here with the Brewcast and our audience, and our thanks to your staff for helping set this one up. For those in our audience as well, like I said, I'm going to put some email contacts here in the show notes. So if you have some follow-on questions, whether it's on the specific reserve issues or talent management issues, we got an open line with the talent management strategy group. So feel free to send all your thoughts and questions on that their way. And last piece is our next Brewcast. We're doing a twofer this week, and this Friday afternoon, we're very fortunate to have, following on Lieutenant General Bellon's heels, the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, Sergeant Major Troy Black, is going to be joining us for one of our rare live studio audience sessions here in the Krulak Center. But there will be a virtual component as always, so that information will go out today after we're done here, and we hope that you can all join us then. Thank you very much.
I'm coming in with a hard question for the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps. He loves it when I do that.
All right, I won't tell him you're coming, sir, so you can
Right.
so you can land with the right impact.
Okay, thanks, Ian.
All right, thank you very much, sir.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.